Well, good morning and welcome to Scotland. So back at quite a familiar place for me, or for us. We have stopped here a number of times over the last couple of years. Circumstance, however, has always put me either too late or too early for peak autumn colour. And certainly, as we've been driving through Scotland for the last 10 days or so, certainly on the too early side of things. But then again, I think we as photographers can get a little bit kind of transfixed on peak colour, golden hour, honey pop. And sometimes when we're kind of focused so much on those conditions, we're left disappointed. How often have we meticulously planned a location, sunrise, seasons missed, only to be left underwhelmed or disappointed? The fast shuffle up to our position, the slow disappointed trudge back to the car, all the while missing what's around us. And certainly a couple of years ago when I came here, I was disappointed because we had to change our plans around. I think there's a vlog up here somewhere, which meant we went to the Outer Hebrides first. Now, it's not a bad backup plan, is it? But when we came back onto mainland Scotland, it was early November and certainly the best of the colour had dissipated. But the reason for the change of our plans was something quite serious. And thankfully we had been given the all clear. And so I, as we like to say back in Ireland, I caught myself on and I was like, Nigel, just be thankful that you're here. And I started, I think at that moment, to really start noticing what was around me, not just looking at the potential of colour and the disappointing lack of colour. And I actually ended up making one of my favourite images from this area. And so I've kind of come back into it again with a more open appreciation that, you know what, we're not in peak colour, but who's to say I'm not going to find an image that floats my boat. Now, yesterday I took a very slow walk around here just to sort of get a lay of the land again. And there were a couple of potential compositions that I wanted to check out. But I came down this morning and right over the water here, now it's slowly dissipated now, but earlier on there was just a lovely little bit of mist floating about. And so I thought I'd maybe sort of hang out here until we get a little bit more light. A couple of the other scenes that I'm maybe looking to shoot, I think we need just a little bit of light. Obviously it's going to be a slightly different direction because it was yesterday evening versus this morning. But I might just hang out here. There's a wee little tiny touch of autumn colour. Nice big Scots pine. And we'll see whether we get any more mist moving through. I'll make an image and then we'll wander on. But remember guys, that old well trotted out sentence is never truer than for the photographer. Remember, it's mostly about the journey, not just the destination. Enjoy the moments. So, on my little bimble through this woodland yesterday, just noticing that mist is actually getting a little bit sort of coming and going. I came across this lovely tree full of berries. And at the time the light was actually playing ball. It was coming from behind you. and obviously just sort of giving a little bit of illumination. Now, this location is in sort of steep-sided valleys, and so even though the sun has risen a good 40 minutes or so ago, we're just not getting any sort of light sort of creeping in here. There's a little tiny little bit of cloud cover above, and I had hoped that maybe that was going to give me a little bit of reflective light, but nothing yet. But it might be soft enough that when it does rise up over the visible horizon, we might get a little bit of light on here. And there are a couple of things that really appeal to me about this scene. Firstly, of course, the berries. And of course, one of the benefits of being a little bit early in the season is those berries are still in kind of plentiful supply and adding a lovely splash of red, not only in this scene, but just dotted around this woodland. You just sort of catch a little dash of red. Obviously, behind me here, those lovely kind of two. In fact, if you look beyond into the woodland, you can even make out another couple, but there's a lovely little opposing sort of curves to them. And I just love that kind of counterbalance of them. And then sort of looking on through, there's another sort of birch in there as well. And then with a slightly longer shutter speed and a polarizer on, taking a lot of that glare off the water, there's just a lovely little bit of movement in the water as well. Yesterday I was getting about a second or so of exposure time. The other thing that kind of was appealing to me, but I couldn't really get it to work, was the combination of the grasses below and the berries, and I was having to kind of focus stack that because I was just really doing a little intimate scene, but it was just very difficult to get all of the elements in play. But that's okay, you know. I've said this before, I would prefer to at least see an image in the scene, in the field, even if I can't necessarily capture it how I want to. At least I've been able to sort of see it while I've been out and about. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get the camera set up, see whether we can get a composition that we're happy with, and then fingers crossed we might get a little bit of light. Let's give that a whirl. So still no light to speak of, but there's a lovely kind of almost bluish greenish tinge to the morning. And there's still a little bit, you can probably just see that up here, still a little bit of mist floating by, nothing too extreme, but just gives a little bit of atmosphere across the river. Now I think there's probably going to be two scenes here, at least that's what I thought there would be yesterday. A horizontal, which is taking in kind of the full scene, the birches, the berries, the river, the reeds, and then maybe a portrait image, which is more just one of the trees and a little bit of the berries and maybe some of the ferns. We're starting to get a little bit more colour in the sky, so maybe we will get a little bit more warmer tones reflected into the scene. What's interesting as well is obviously with the position of the sun, not getting as much polarization as I was yesterday, but I quite like it because it is actually giving a sort of a silvery blue tinge to the scene as well. I thought originally I would be shooting this in a 16:9 format, but I think the 3:2 works reasonably well. There are a couple of things that I'm paying attention to. So on the left hand side of the frame, those two birch trees, depending on the position that I take up, there either is a little bit of gap between them, or as is the case now, they're, even though they're not because they're obviously behind each other, it just looks as though they're almost sort of just kissing, just touching each other. And I think I prefer that, at least in this scene, that little sort of kiss rather than leaving a gap between them. On the right hand side of the frame, that's where I think I have a little bit of a problem with the current sort of position that I've taken up. And that's because there's a fallen log in the middle of the river and it's got another sort of sapling growing out of it. And at the moment, it's kind of just half in behind. It doesn't know whether to be half in behind or half not in behind the sort of main berry tree, which is a little bit frustrating, because if I move myself more to the right and reveal that tree, I then lose, I think, the better balance of the two birch trees. On the far side of the river, If I was to move myself a little bit more further left, there's another birch tree on the other side, which does actually bring a little bit of balance and almost a natural framing element. But again, moving my position, I think I really like that sort of kiss of those two trees. So what I'll do is I'll carry on trying to wrestle an image from this scene, and we'll see where we go. Well, we're not going anywhere, we're going to stand here and see whether we can wrestle something from this scene. Didn't you hear what I said? So I've now turned my attention to that portrait image that I spoke of. This time, certainly more to do with those birches. And again, I really love that. I mentioned this earlier. I really love that feeling of just the two birches just kissing each other. And of course, it's a trick of the eye, because the second birch is actually quite a good 4 or 5 foot behind the first one. But again, just a little nod to those two birches kissing, with the left-hand one sort of disappearing up into the top left-hand corner. And then again, this time a little bit more emphasis with those ferns. It'd be lovely if we had a little bit more sort of rustic tone in that. And then of course more of the berries. Getting a little bit more polarization potential. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to shoot a couple with different sort of polarization levels, just to give me a little bit of flexibility in the old digital darkroom, depending on which one I like. But yeah, and what's interesting as well, and this can be a good sort of practice exercise when you're out in the field, it doesn't, whenever you sort of stand about and there's not sort of any direct light, you sometimes don't notice the subtle change in light. Now, through time in the field, you do notice that, and right now I've noticed it once again, even while I've been talking to you. The light temperature, the temperature has certainly got a lot cooler again. But actually what I had done was I'd shot 4 or 5 images of that previous scene, and it was interesting, even in the sort of 15-20 minutes that I was talking to you and just sort of standing around, it was difficult to tell just by looking at the scene, but it had certainly warmed up a little bit. And now again it's cooling back down again. Now I personally think we do need a little bit of warmth just to bring out the textures and tones in the bark of the birch. We've got a little bit more mist now hanging around, so that temperature has dropped a little bit as well. But I'm going to hang out here, see whether we can get something with a little bit of a warmer temperature, and then we'll move on. So I think one of the things that I've really started to question when I stop in front of a scene, rather than simply just get the camera out and sort of look to compose something, really trying to ask myself, what is it that I like about the scene? Now sometimes that can be an obvious question to answer. Beautiful sunset, lovely light, maybe a little splash of colour in a otherwise sort of very monochromatic scene. But I think it can still be very useful just to ask ourselves that question. A couple of reasons. One, it perhaps allows us to inform our processing when we are back in the digital darkroom, if we remember exactly what drew ourselves to the scene in the first place. And similarly, it can help you to perhaps accentuate that in the field by composing slightly different to really highlight what you like about the scene. Now, it seemed quite obvious as I was walking up this path why my eye was drawn to the scene, and that's because it's a huge, probably one of the only patches in this woodland of quite turned over, quite autumnal ferns, and so it does stand out. But actually, as I stood here sort of contemplating what really drew my eye to it, I think there were a couple of things. Firstly, the natural kind of sweeping down through the woodland to the other little sort of patch of birch tree. That's certainly something that drew my eye. And secondly, here, at the front of the scene, the other little bit of birch, the other flash of white in an otherwise very sort of autumnal green, yellows, ambers sort of scene. And so that's what I've been sort of trying to counterbalance in the image. On the right hand side, the birch tree, just giving that little flash of white, and then hopefully the autumnal colours sort of rolling, tumbling down through the frame, and then a stand of about 4 or 5 other birch trees set against a little bit more light. Now, earlier on when I was sort of composing this here, there was just a little bit of reflective light coming in, which I think is what the scene needs, just to bring out not necessarily the colours in the foreground, because I think they're kind of speaking for themselves, but there is just a little bit of yellows and oranges away in the background, away through the other side of the valley, and I would like just a little bit more light, maybe just to sort of bring those up. Again, just being very careful not to include any of the sky, just so I can keep everything sort of a reasonable tone. F something or other, as always. Got a 2-second timer on this. And we'll go ahead and shoot that image. But hopefully, we get a little bit more light that will allow us to maybe raise it a little bit, but still a very nice scene and a very worthwhile exercise, just asking ourselves, what do we really like about the scene? Well guys, that light has now broken through, and beautiful morning, but not particularly photogenic now, so I'm going to take that as my cue to go back to the van, grab a coffee, and make a plan for the rest of the day. But it's been beautiful to come back to this location. This is now, I think, 4th or 5th year back in this location, trying to wrestle an image or two. And it has been nice to see it in the early throes of autumn and just picking out little pockets of colour. And as that sun rose up the visible horizon, we did get a lovely little bit of mist, and so I turned my attention to another distant tree and hopefully made one final image of the morning. But yeah, really nice. And hopefully, over the next couple of weeks, a bit more autumnal Scottish fun to be had. But I guess that's going to be a vlog for next time. Right guys, as always, thanks for following along. And until next time, take care. Bye-bye.